and plenty of space in between for questions and answers after each presentation, and then hopefully some space at the end for discussion to pick up on any points that people want to bring, having heard all the presentations. So the first, I'll just run through the programme now. We'll hear from Dr. McGarry, who will be talking about the CVI Africa project. Then we'll hear from Dr. Adam Markham from the Union of Concerned Scientists, who will be talking about the global perspective. Then from Brenda, Dr. Brenda Ekwurzel, who also from the Union of Concerned Scientists, who will be talking about the more countrywide or region of the continent aspects of climate change. And Dr. Itua, who will be speaking about the Nigerian perspective, and Professor Zemba, who will be speaking about the Sukur and the regional perspectives from within Nigeria. And then we'll have some closing remarks from ICOMOS Nigeria. So welcome everybody. I hope you can hear me okay, and I'm going to hand over now to Will. I think also just before we a handover, if we could use the chat function. Yeah. Yes, that might be helpful if people could indicate in the chat function whether you'd like to ask a question or indeed what that question is. It's not essential, but it would be good for me to know what questions are coming in so that I could share them at the end of each of the presentations. Okay. Great. So Will, I'd like you to go ahead now and introduce the project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jane, and hello, everybody. I should be sharing my screen, and I'm hoping you can all hear me. So unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to just continue. So yes, thank you very much, Jane, and thank you especially to ICOMOS Nigeria and the organizers of this wonderful webinar for asking me to speak today and introduce the CVI project. And the project is exploring the vulnerability of African World Heritage properties to climate change. And well, I'm afraid I'm not able to stay for the duration of the webinar today due to a previous commitment. What I'd like to do for the next 5 minutes is just introduce you a little bit to the project for those who are not familiar with it, and some of the team of people who have been working very hard over the last year and longer to bring it into reality. So it's increasingly understood that climate change is the fastest growing threat to our global cultural and natural heritage. Indeed, recent discussions at the World Heritage Committee meeting in China emphasized the enormity of this challenge. And while most heritage sites are facing some kind of risk, impact to World Heritage properties are often more visible due to their iconic nature and their national and international significance. The recent IUCN Outlook 3, which was published in December 2020, assesses climate change as a high or very high threat in 33% of natural World Heritage properties. And unfortunately, we lack a similar mechanism or technique for assessing its impact to cultural and mixed cultural natural sites. So the CVI project is exploring the utility of one potential existing methodology to do this, and this is called the Climate Vulnerability Index, or CVI, in Africa. The CVI is built on the premise that the impacts of climate change are not only physical. Many sites are vital to the economic well-being of communities and countries, or have ongoing social or religious significance, which is threatened by climate change. The CVI process initially identifies the unique heritage and socio-economic values of an individual site, and it then works with in-country climate scientists, which is part of what we're doing today, to identify potential impacts to these values, balancing these with the adaptive capacities of both the sites and also their associated communities. To date, the CVI process has only been applied in sites in Western Europe and Australia. And the CVI Africa project is the first time it has been applied in the continent of Africa. So the project has two distinct phases, training and application. Okay. Phase one ran over the summer and focused on training. A 12-week course was delivered remotely to participants from 6 African countries, including Cabo Verde, Tunisia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Nigeria. Topics included climate science and literacy, heritage management and adaptation, and cultural heritage vulnerability assessment. Phase two then focused on applying and adapting the CVI methodology at 2 African World Heritage Sites, Kilwa Kisawani in Tanzania, and of course the topic of this webinar, the Sukur cultural landscape in Nigeria. This process has had to adapt significantly due to COVID and other challenges, including the remote participation of experts. And the workshops are also an opportunity for our training participants to be involved in a CVI application at a specific site. And it's lovely to see some of our participants here at this webinar today. It's hoped that this participation will then enable these participants to employ aspects of this knowledge within their own professional practice and at their sites. So the CVI Africa project brings together projects from both the ICMOS Working Group on Climate Change and Cultural Heritage and the Climate Heritage Network. They come from many heritage organizations across the world and include in-country partners from Tanzania and Nigeria, intergovernmental heritage organizations like the African World Heritage Fund, and heritage advisory bodies like ICMOS. Many have hands-on practical experience adapting to climate impacts on sites, while others have experience in climate heritage policy, remote education, and distance learning and training in vulnerability assessment. As such, the CVI Africa project is envisioned as a knowledge exchange rather than a knowledge transfer exercise, sharing knowledge about climate change and adaptation and equipping heritage practitioners to respond to this challenge. This really important webinar today is a part of this exercise. It's an opportunity for us to share experiences, hear from experts, work together to address this challenge. And I look forward to listening to the other papers and congratulate you all again on this wonderful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will, for introducing our project. I'm aware that some of you are familiar with it, but others are new to it who are joining us today. So I'll pause for a moment for any questions that you have about the presentation that Will McGarry has just shared with us. Thank you. And
That must have been very thorough.
We're welcoming more people into the meeting as we go along. So I'll just restate a small introduction. I'm Professor Jane Downs from the University of the Highlands and Islands. I'm part of the CVI Africa project team. This event is to look at the climate change, heritage and culture aspects and how they combine. And we're looking forward to seeing a series of speakers. The meeting is being recorded, and if you'd like to pose questions, you can raise your hand, and also you can indicate in the chat that you'd like to ask a question or indeed what that question is. Okay, so without further ado now, we'll move into the first presentation on the climate change situation. And this is Dr. Adam Markham from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Now, Adam was with us. Maybe, oh, here.
Keep dropping. I'm going to try and share again. Okay. Okay, can someone indicate, Jane, can you indicate if you can see the screen, the shared screen?
Not quite yet.
Okay, it should be screen sharing. So let's just wait and see. It says I'm screen sharing, that you can't see it can't see it.
No, we can't see it, I'm afraid. Perhaps you would like to send it to me, Adam, and we could move on to seeing Brenda's presentation, if you think that's a solution.
Right. I hear that, Jane.
I was suggesting maybe you send me your presentation. Oh, it started to share.
You can, okay, great. Oh, sorry. I think I have a dual internet. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Adam. Thanks for inviting me here, the CVI Africa project, the acting director for climate and energy, non-profit NGO organization in the US called the Union of Scientists. Now, so I want to talk about climate change, heritage, and culture. One of the things that are World Heritage sites impacted by climate change, and the answer to that is no. Are there World Heritage sites that are more at risk than others? Absolutely. So not every World Heritage site, not every
Adam, we're not able to hear you and your presentation stopped showing. If you could send me your presentation. Adam, you got bounced out. So
Jane, I'm sending you my presentation and Brenda can go before me. Would that work?
I see that I get an error message,
Okay, so
host
I'll
disabled
stop sharing.
participant screen sharing. It says host disabled participant screen sharing for me. So maybe if host controls could be allow participant screen sharing, or we could be, I'm not elevated to a co-host, so I wouldn't be able to share my screen. I have an error message. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
okay, thank you. We'll sort that.
I suppose you can screen again. Can you share it again?
Yeah, we can see your screen, Adam.
Okay, why don't I continue and we'll see where we get with that. About that.
Yeah.
That I was involved in recent looking at World Heritage and combined impacts of climate change and tourism. And you can see on this slide with a case study in this report, which is available at the World Heritage website. So as World Heritage face climate change, unpredicted future, we can't any longer rely on the climate and weather patterns of the past for planning World Heritage management. We're going to see degradation of outstanding value of World Heritage sites, and in some cases, costs of
Jane, I sent you a chat. Could you check it, please?
Yes, yes, I did. I will. Right. Okay, I think we will go ahead with Brenda. I'll just look into the. Okay, thank you, Brenda. We have Dr. Brenda Ekwurzel, who will now speak about the Africa view. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to Nigeria ICOMOS and everyone who's been organizing this. It's a real honor to be here this morning. While Adam Markham it comes back, he's talking about climate change and heritage, and I'm going to focus now on cultural heritage in the respect from changing climate change globally and Africa view. Thank you so much. Here, I'm going to share my screen right now. So everyone, it's really wonderful to everyone who supported this morning, and it's really good to see all of you here today. So we're here for the Sukur Cultural Landscape, the Sukur webinar, and I show on this map the location of this important cultural heritage site, as well as another site and many other places within the continent of Africa that are so important, have so many cherished history for local communities, as well as indeed for the world. And climate change is indeed at the level of about around 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels of global average temperature. And I'm going to share with you some of the changes that have already occurred from the pre-industrial area to today, as well as quickly in the next 14 or so minutes, a look towards the future. And I will tell you that I'm going to be sharing some slides from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, most recent report release after about 6 years, waiting for this important release. So you will see a little stamp over these figures because they may change due to final editing. So you're getting very recent climate science. So it's very exciting, actually. Thank you so much. Here we go. It's really good to remember that all places all over the earth naturally exhibit climate variability. You can have a much drier than average time of the year, or a few years over a decade for a location. But at other times, it's much wetter than average over a season, or perhaps over a few years within a decade. And other times, this type of situation is what we expect, and it's called climate variability. Now, there's another aspect that's climate change, which is really a shift in average conditions, as expressed in these examples of loss of land ice and sea level rise over time. So to recap, weather occurs over hours, days, and weeks, and climate variability occurs over months to years, and climate change occurs over decades to centuries. So what was the temperature history, and what about the future temperature change? So first, we're going to look at the history and future changes in temperature. So the human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented in at least the last 2,000 years. This is according to the latest report, and it really means we already are living within a world that has changed because of climate change. Let's go back 100 years and look at the annual average surface temperature in Africa compared to the baseline period of 1951 to 1980. The colors are degrees Celsius departure from the baseline period average. So this is what the world looked like in parts of Africa 100 years ago. This is the average departure 100 years ago from this historical average of 1951 to 80. Now let's look at the departure from the same base period just in the last year. You can see that parts of Africa, every part is warmer than the historical average, and it's certainly warmer than a century ago. Now, this is a figure from the IPCC that talks about the Earth is out of balance. Normally, if you look at the left side of the figure, you can see that incoming radiation from the sun is balanced typically by the outgoing heat and radiation. But in a world where we have climate change, most of that energy is going into the ocean. About 91% of these extra energy we've put by burning coal, oil, and gas into the atmosphere, most of it is going in the ocean. About 3% is going into land ice, 5% is on land, heating up the land, and only 1% is heating the atmosphere. And you can see this change through history. We're looking at around the recent history where we have good measurements from the 1980 through to present. And this is that timestamp I was telling you about. So what we have is that the upper ocean is absorbing a huge amount of the heat over the last decades in the upper 700 meters. For example, within the zone where you might find a cultural heritage relic, such as a shipwreck, any cultural heritage within this climate system, this one's off the coast of Kenya. And then we also have warming of the deeper ocean, and a little bit is going into the land ice and the snows of melting, the snows of Kilimanjaro glaciers, and a tiny bit is going into warming up the land. So we live on the land and we know it's warming up, but it's very important to remember that most of it is in the ocean. So that means as the land is warming up, we are having projected changes in extremes that are much larger in frequency and intensity with every additional increment of global warming. Today, we're at 1 degree Celsius. So some of these historical extreme heat events are now possible. Things that weren't possible are now possible. What's very rare might happen twice as likely. If you go another ½ degree Celsius, something would be, say, 4 times as likely. But 2 degrees Celsius, even more. And the more global average temperature, you see this is non-linear. The more major the extreme event, the more likely it will occur. And that is much more dangerous for our systems or cultural heritage sites that were built in a much lower temperature and experience much lesser extremes. So this is another view of Africa. How does this work with a heat index that is very important for human health? We see that another ½ degree warming, vast swaths of portions of Africa, including West Africa, would experience heat warnings. And in some of it, and even within the Paris Agreement of a 2 degrees Celsius warming, parts of Western Africa could have between 3 months of heat warnings for human health. This could be very dangerous if we went past the Paris Agreement, went as warm as 4 degrees global average temperature. So these are very dangerous conditions that we would like to avoid in the future. I'm going to switch to precipitation, which is very, very important for cultural heritage sites that may be vulnerable to extreme precipitation. Also for systems that do often bring precipitation. We know that parts of Western Africa experience, and parts of Other parts of Africa in the southern regions experience regional monsoons, which bring some of the most intense precipitation in a normal, natural way. But what we see is that the historical trends for Western Africa, the black is the observed. We've already seen a trend in increased precipitation in the monsoon rains in the observed record. Future projected changes in Western Africa all indicate by different climate models that this could get even more intense. So this would have implications for cultural heritage sites. What we have also is that the increase in global warming, you see that you can get some really heavy precipitation that was not even possible before. So many structures would be at risk from extreme precipitation. This is also very important for the different crop and the livestock that depend on crop vegetation to eat and foraging and grazing. Where the rains are falling and what are the ability for regions to really grow and have enough water, but also what happens when there is increased evapotranspiration. So you need a balance between a lot of rainfall and what might happen with temperature change. Sometimes you have an increase in rainfall, but you also have a change in mean crop yield. So the darker colors, you lower crop yield. So crop yield really can be affected by climate change. So let me show you that future projections show that there could be a slight decrease of around 10 to 20% potentially with future climate change. So what we can see is that we have precipitation changing. In some parts, you have increased precipitation overall. In other parts, such as Southern Africa, we would likely have a decrease, but the hashed marks tell you that the science of where precipitation happens and what the trend is uncertain in all the hashed areas. So we still have to wait for the science to evolve to give better projections. We also see, though, that there's in areas where there's likely an increase in evapotranspiration. So you're going to have more drying. Runoff is going to be affected as well. And their surface soil moisture is really important for growing crops. But luckily, some of this is uncertain. The part that isn't uncertain, most climate models say that southern portions of Africa are likely to have a decrease in the percentage of soil moisture. Okay, and also, if anyone could please tell me if I have more time or whether I should wrap this up really quickly. Because I'm not hearing anything right now.
Please, Brenda, you have some more time, so please tell us some more.
Okay, all right, great. So just real quickly to recap, the reason it's so important with climate change and crops is something happens is that when you warm the atmosphere, a warmer air can hold more moisture. And what that means that even if you had the same amount of rainfall in a warmer climate, warmer atmosphere, there's a moisture deficit in a way, and the plants lose the water into the atmosphere more with climate change. So you need even more rain, more irrigation, if that's even possible, in places where you are growing crops and the vegetation of forests and everything else. So one tricky thing with climate change is it's lots of times you will dry out your crops too early, or you might mess up a harvest, or you might not be able to grow to achieve the yields that you need to support a sustainable community, ecosystem, and livestock. So this is also the funny thing, even though you have a warmer atmosphere and you're losing water from your vegetation, at the same time, climate change can bring through atmospheric dynamics very heavy precipitation events. So this is an example from the IPCC of a 1 in 10 year event. Historically, was really rare. It's 1 in 10 years. So we have one event every 10 years. But with today's level of climate, it's now a little bit more likely to occur. With the Paris level of agreement level of climate change, we have to prepare for more of these frequent events being about 1.5 to 1.7 times more likely a 1 in 10 year event. But with a higher temperature, more likely to occur. But this is the nonlinear aspect of global average temperature change. Let's switch to the more extreme event with droughts. We see that with droughts that you can have a higher predilection also for droughts. So even though you might have more intense rain, very extreme precipitation, you also can have more extreme droughts happening. So the water cycle under climate change is much more treacherous to adapt to. But the Paris Agreement level of climate change is more like the world today compared to overshooting and going beyond what the Paris Agreement says. So it's very important to meet those international agreements for climate change in the Paris Agreement. So let's quickly look at species. They depend on water, they depend on temperature, and at 1.5 degrees, we see that we can lose over half of the climatically determined geographic range with another 0.5 degree warming of 1.5 degrees. We would lose the habitable area for nearly 10% of the insects, nearly 8% of the plants, and 4% of the vertebrates. If we go to another 0.5 degree warming at 2 degrees Celsius, these percentages nearly double in many cases. Let's see, for example, in Mount Kilimanjaro, we have in the green zone, a coffee banana plantation growing region, salmontane region. On the southern slope of Mount Kilimanjaro, you can imagine with warming and these species, do they have the ability to move up slope? Is the area of where they're able to grow shrinking? Under climate change, this is a likely scenario. So this has profound effects for economically important crops and species that are dependent in these mountain submontane zones. This is just really quickly, coral reefs in the ocean, warm water coral reefs are extremely vulnerable to climate change. And we have more of these bleaching events, and these species are extremely at risk with climate change, and really holding the world to global average temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius could save some of the reefs. Going higher, it's really quite grim. So cultural landscapes where we have objects that are in the marine environment, they are going to be in warmer waters, and this may accelerate degradation. Do I have time for sea level rise, or should I end it here?
Yes, you have time. Brenda,
Okay.
please carry on.
Really quick. This is the historical average. We can look at Africa, parts of Africa. We see that from parts of Western Africa, the southern regions of Africa, we see that sea level rise in the historical period has increased. The relative sea level rise has increased, basically all around the shores of Africa, and certainly a little bit more on the southern half of the continent. Now let's look forward. I would have to say, of all the graphs and all the science from the IPCC, this one is the most closest to the latest science. Essentially, if we hold the world to the Paris Agreement, we could, by the year several centuries out from the ice, we could hold sea level rise long enough for people to adapt and give us time. However, there is a chance that under the higher emission scenarios, business as usual, we could be much higher sea level rises, which would put very low lying coastal areas and cultural heritage sites at risk. But this arrow going up saying, this isn't the worst case, what some of the models are saying are even higher. So this is way far out in time. But you can see that within this century, if we were at the higher emission scenario, there are some things happening in the West Antarctic ice sheet in Greenland that could give us some high sea level rise even within this century, starting around 2060. We hope with the Paris Agreement world, you could avoid this century and really have more time to figure out decisions around cultural heritage. It's really, really important to do the Paris Climate Agreement for any coastal region. It's extremely critical. Okay, we're closing in here. Thank you so much. Ultimately, the bottom line is that for every ton of carbon dioxide emissions, it adds to global warming. And I encourage everyone to use this chart to look at cumulative carbon dioxide emissions and what the global average temperature surface increase would be compared to the pre-industrial, and how much time do we have left for cumulative emissions to stay within 2 degrees Celsius. It's actually we're very close to the Paris Agreement. We are running out of our global budget of being able to burn coal, oil, and gas and release carbon dioxide and other heat trapping emissions into the atmosphere. So the Paris Agreement is very important. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and all those who put in resources to support this. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for that presentation. I think that really gives us some clear insights. I think we've got time for some questions now on the basis of Brenda's presentation.
Brenda, could I ask a couple of questions, please? The first one, you talked about CO2 emissions, and we hear a lot about carbon dioxide emissions, but we also hear that there are other things like methane. Can you put the various greenhouse gas emissions into a sort of context? Are they all equally bad? What's the sort of proportion that's currently up there and looking like in the future? That's my first question. And then if we have time and there are no other questions, I'll come back to another one.
Sure. Well, methane is very important. It really traps heat over a 20-year time period, 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. However, after about a decade, it changes into carbon dioxide. And so it really is important to get a handle on both carbon dioxide emissions and methane emissions. Both of those are from the extraction and production and combustion of coal, oil, and natural gas. And so that's something that is interesting to think about, because the other gases, I can show you if I'll show this. I'll share my screen and quickly show you right here. We see that greenhouse gases driven by emissions from human activities, and we see that carbon dioxide is the biggest contributor. Methane is the next largest contributor. I don't know if you're seeing this graph or not. Then nitrous oxide, which in agricultural practices, using fertilizer with nitrogen, halogenated gases, the warming ones, and volatile organic compounds, which are often from the use of fossil fuels and other natural sources, and black carbon, incomplete combustion for burning, say for cooking or things like that, or from wildfires. These are all warming the planet. And also we have other types of gases that offset and cool the planet. But overall, the human contribution, it has accelerated. But you can see that just what you said, John, carbon dioxide and methane are the largest contributors.
Thanks, Brenda. If there's no other questions, I've got another one, but let's a few other people ask theirs first.
I have a question coming in from Lente, so I'll just bring you in.
Hi, hello. This is Blen. I'm a PhD student based at the University of Oxford, and I'm studying the climate of a specific site in northern Ethiopia, just trying to understand the implications of weathering of rock-hewn structures and my site. So I just had a thank you for the presentation, first of all, and just a general question as to how to deal with coarse spatial resolution for climate data, for climate projections in Africa, and the variability of landscapes and so on, and how that might influence these coarse climate projections kind of don't give us specific clues. And at least as a heritage researcher, I sometimes find it difficult because when you look at different papers, they look at a much larger region, and sometimes they even contradict in their projections of how much rain will increase and decrease for different seasons. But they all say that temperature will increase, but rain sometimes is more important, as you stated earlier, for heritage sites. So how do we go around dealing with these very coarse spatial resolutions for climate projections in Africa? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. It is, as I mentioned, and as you just recalled, that the uncertainty around precipitation is one of the hardest things for climate scientists to nail down. And in the Africa region, there are some complex dynamics with monsoons, seas where the affected rains are coming from. But one thing that does seem to be important to recognize is that wherever it does rain, it likely will continue to rain for some portion of the year. Even in desert regions, we will find that it will rain at a certain time of the year, but when the rains come, under climate change, it is more likely that they will be much more intense because the atmosphere can hold more water vapor, and usually the ocean is much warmer. And so you are, for the very regions where you're gathering, releasing water to the atmosphere in the ocean, it's a much bigger, more vigorous process. And when those clouds are affected onto land or they're going upslope, they're going to be cooler, and then you're going to lose your water, because the only way that the clouds can get over those mountains is to let go of their rain water. So any places that have elevation changes and they have some water, those are going to get probably higher elevation regions are going to get even more intense precipitation than they did in the past, because it's a warmer atmosphere. The water can hold more, those clouds can go up higher. So some of the lower areas that used to get rain may not get as much rain. And it depends on those situations. So we often say in climate change that the wet places are going to get wetter and the dry places are going to get drier. But it doesn't really tell the full story, because sometimes if you look at the annual average of precipitation, even if it was the same volume all year long total, it may be delivered in more intense precipitation events, and in between it could be quite drought-inducing conditions in some regions. So it's almost you turbocharge the water cycle. So that means it's hard on both ends. Too much water when you don't want it, too little water when you most need it, is often the trends with climate change. And you have to plan for that and adapt, which is not always easy if you have rain-dependent agriculture. Sorry, I didn't have better news on that front.
Thank you. I have a question coming in from Uma Salaanka. If you would like to make your question now. Right, Uma, you have your hand up. I just wondered if you had a question. Okay, thank you. I think, John, you had another question, did you?
Sorry, yes, Brenda, you mentioned, and I might have missed it, in one of your slides, you had an infographic talking about the loss of geographic ranges under different scenarios, and it was pretty scary to see the doubling in the loss of area for Paris compared to business as usual, or sorry, other way around. But can I just clarify, tropics and temperate and obviously polar are very different, but just in Africa, for example, is this loss of half the range similar for both tropics and temperate?
Sure. What we see is that the Arctic regions are warming 2 to 3 times more than the global average right now, especially in the Arctic. And the tip of parts of Antarctica are warming more than the global average. So any species in the Arctic is severely at risk because of that, especially ice-dependent, Arctic ice-dependent species such as the ring seal or things like that. They would, and that's part of the reason why, just like you said, we used as our icon the polar bear here for the vertebrate, only 4% at risk at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So at the same time, you're losing over half the climatically determined geographic range. And if your climatically determined geographic range is the Arctic or the coldest place on Earth, when you lose half of that geographic range, it's not as if you can go somewhere else on Earth and you can transfer a polar bear down to Antarctica or something. I guess we could, but they naturally would not be moving down there. It's pretty grim. They more likely would move on shore, but the ring seal, for example, may not. And the same thing with the mountain example I showed you in the tropics. However, there is within this situation of plants and vertebrates within the tropical region, I would say the one most know that's at risk is not just the regions of Mount Kilimanjaro where you have high elevation regions and they have to move up slope, but is the soil appropriate? Is it too rocky? Is it getting enough precipitation at that elevation? Is it losing evaporation? But as you go further up the mountain, it gets smaller and smaller, the area. And some of it would be, so high elevation region species are also at risk in the tropics. So look at your high elevation regions, but also especially, which well, which is the warm water corals in the tropical regions are probably one of the species most at risk from just another 0.5 degree warming and 2 degrees Celsius warming, the upper guardrail of the Paris Agreement. This is one of the regions, especially because 70% of the Earth is ocean. And as I said, 91% of the warming to date has gone into the ocean. The ocean is heating the most, and it is having serious marine heat waves, we call them. And these heat waves that bathe the tropical corals off of Africa, in those tropical regions of the continent of Africa, and especially the Great Barrier Reef, parts of other reefs around the world are severely at risk. So the tropics aren't escaping climate change in terms of species at risk.
Okay.
Thank you. Now
I'm back.
Good.
Can I? Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. My name is Umar Salianka, a fellow of Nigerian Environmental Society. Thank you for the contribution you've made. My observation or question is, what's your take on the net zero emission? Because we know there's a net tracker available now. The UN has set up a net zero coalition, and the World Resource Institute has also have a net zero tracker, and over a number of firms, over 160 firms, have invested over $70 trillion to this Glasgow conference, COP26. So do you think net zero is achievable by 2050 as it's the new craze, people say it, in climate change illusion?
Yes, it is a new craze, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your question. Let me show you what I think with the assistance of the IPCC. Are you seeing these bar charts with little circles below them? I can't tell whether you are.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we can see
Okay.
it. We can see it.
So this is the proportion of carbon dioxide emissions taken up by land and ocean carbon sinks is smaller in scenarios with higher cumulative carbon dioxide emissions. So one important thing about net zero is if you're using natural nature-based carbon sinks that, trees take up carbon dioxide for them and they give off oxygen. And in the ocean takes up all the creatures living in the ocean are taking up the plants equivalent are taking up carbon dioxide. Any animals that have shells that make shells, they are taking carbon dioxide that's dissolved in the ocean and making their shells, and they die and they go to the bottom of the ocean. And that's a kind of sequestration of carbon from the ocean. One problem with net zero is if we think that we could burn a whole bunch of CO2 emissions, say, and we want the land and ocean to offset it later in time, we will have overrun our checking balance or whatever. We've taken too much out because the ability of the land and ocean to take up carbon dioxide that we emit in the high emission scenario decreases to around 38% in this model shown in the IPCC. But if we keep it to the Paris Agreement level, then we can have 65 to 70% of the land and ocean helping us to try to stay and achieve net zero sustainability. And that is really important. The only way that we can achieve net zero likely is to have absolutely deep, rapid race to zero carbon emissions and other heat trapping emissions. But this is the carbon cycle. It's the biggest part of the problem. So this part of the problem, you need to have low emissions, but also looking for technical fixes that basically take over 200 years of emissions, potentially by the end of the century. Waiting for that would probably be a very, very, very difficult task. It's not impossible, but you need both in tandem.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
So the new craze, we should live with it.
Yeah, we do really have to get to net zero because in part, it's very difficult with the active carbon cycle. We all live, we have livestock that are living, we have rice growing in wetlands. That's part of the active carbon cycle. So you have to make sure that you're taking up as much carbon as you are respiring in any given year or over a decade or over 50 years. And that will put the earth back into balance. So we're probably going to have to make sure we remove carbon dioxide actively from the atmosphere to hold to the Paris Agreement level of warming. And it's a tall order. It's not impossible, it's possible, but it gets very hard if we blow past Paris.
So thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Brenda. Much appreciate your wealth of knowledge, and it's just excellent to have you here, and I'm sure we'll be returning with more questions to you. At the moment, we'll be moving on. As you'll have seen in the chat, hopefully, Adam can't make the connection to join us, but he has a presentation which he created for the training course that we've been running as part of the CVI workshop and training event. So there's a link to that there on YouTube, so it's easily accessible. It's about 20 minutes, and it details what he was going to be talking about. So that's the links between climate change and heritage directly. So I hope you can look at that after the today's event. We just have one question come through for you, Brenda, which I'll just permit you to answer if you would. It's in the chat.
Do you want me to answer via chat or just right now?
It's quite a, yeah, it's quite a wide ranging answer, I would think so.
I'll answer in the chat then.
Yeah, thank you. And it's probably something we will be returning to. Okay, so yes, I think if now I could turn to Dr. Eugene Itua and ask you to make your presentation, Dr. Itua. And this is the Nigerian view of climate change. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And good enough, the one we just had seems to provide a platform for us to talk about the policy issues regarding cultural heritage. I just wanted to quickly look at what we have in relation to policy, as you must have seen on the screen by now. Undoubtedly, climate change is, like has been described, is one of the biggest concerns of mankind today. And from what has been said, we all need to put our hands together to fight the challenges of climate change. And in doing this, the Nigerian president at the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly has said that his administration will work to reverse the negative impact or effects of climate change in Nigeria. Of course, all of us are feeling the impact like others do elsewhere. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are looking at the issues of cultural heritage. And just to quickly reflect on these 2 points, tangible and intangible resources that we have that could be imparted: monuments, historic buildings, cultural landscape, archaeological sites, and historic objects. These are tangible cultural heritage. The ones we cannot see, the knowledge, the performing arts, social practices, oral tradition, and expressions. Just resources inherited from the past and created in the course of time by people. All of these are our cultural heritage. And we take delight in the beauty they give to us. We're always happy to see the color, the glamour, just name it. And indeed, with our cultural heritage, we promote creativity, as this slide has shown. What about the traditional skills? We continue to ensure that they are there. And indeed, ladies and gentlemen, we see how they meet our modern day needs, contribute to world growth of culture and ideas. So much has been said about this site in the previous slides that were shared by the earlier presenter. I think all of us, like I said earlier, we always want to see the beauty that this cultural heritage gives to us. And indeed, we also make money from it. Is it from tourism, recreation, or what they give to us in the urban rural setting? They play their vital role in our lives. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, for us in this part of the world, our culture, our heritage, they are all endangered. They are not getting the best from all of us. And unfortunately, the climate scenario has come to further worsen the situation. People that are trying as much as possible to feed themselves, will they be in position trying to save some cultural artifacts, heritage, and so on and so forth? Recall, in the previous speaker have talked about, for instance, heavy precipitation, what it could have on some of the sites. And indeed, they have become so vulnerable. In their natural habitat or in their natural harbor, of course, they are impacted. We see that everywhere across our land. Whether we look at the rise in temperature, excessive flooding, drought, just name it, all of this impacts on our resources that we are talking about. Looking at the challenges that have indeed worsened the situation, the institutional framework, the policies that we have, laws and regulations, do we actually have the instruments that will enable us to deal with the challenges? Do we have the instrument that will support decision makers? Do we have the instrument that will support all of us as stakeholders so that we can reduce the risk faced by this challenge, by these resources? And indeed, the level of awareness and knowledge that we have, being climate aware, how many of us indeed are now looking at the issues of vulnerability and indeed risk to the diverse cultural heritage that we have? How many of us understand all of this? Ladies and gentlemen, you also have, I just talked about issues of money not too long ago. The lack of stakeholder motivation and willingness to act. The inattention or in the drive to balance their means of livelihood, their survival. How many actually give that so much appreciation to these resources that we have? The funding to also do the necessary things. I've never heard that there is this cultural site in Nigeria that, oh, for the sake of history, we want to dig or excavate that cultural site and understand what had been there. So all of this in themselves are barriers to growing and supporting our heritage. This slide says, without significant intervention, some of Nigeria's most important heritage will be lost as a result of the impact of climate change over coming decades. From the scenarios painted not too long ago, we've seen that, and it's been demonstrated by the previous speaker. And then looking at it from the climate policy or climate change and policy angle, the question is, how has cultural heritage been considered in our policy and indeed in our action? Since we know this is a global fight, what are we looking at from this angle? Is it part of what the nation is giving attention? Well, looking at it again from the institution itself that stands to manage this, Are they in position to drive it? As the user, you permit me to use that, the user agency that will ensure that all of us support what is being done.
No matter what we have in policy, as land area, landmark.
Since they have the mandate,
There are other places.
it will be good if you can mute the person speaking, please.
There's interference, please.
Now, by making policies that could be what it should be.
Could you mute the person, please? So, if the mandate is to manage the collection and so on and so forth, the question is, from the angle we're looking at this today, are you really in position to work with the climate change department or the Federal Ministry of Environment to ensure that all of us become aware, all of us are in support of maintaining our heritage and promoting their significance? How relevant is the 1988 National Cultural Policy to us today? Ladies and gentlemen, I have given an outline here of the so many relevant policies that have been, that are still there. If you go through them directly, not one of them talk about cultural heritage, directly speaking. We have a gamut of them. And this is what you have. The question is, in the light of all of this, in relation to this cultural heritage, cultural sites, how can we see climate change? Are we only going to see from the risk angle? In itself, we want to see it as a driving factor in the evolution of conservation policies. And because it is like that, the more reason why we all want to join hands together to ensure that this is mainstream in the relevant policies, regulations that we have in the country. And that is what we want to, the way we want to, just as we're looking at other sectors, we want to build resilience in other sectors. Could we also do that in this sector that is faced also with climate risk? Is very possible. If we do that, we'll be sustaining our national pride. We'll further increase our economic growth. And to do all of this, we must all harness our efforts to ensure resilience building. First and foremost, is it possible to develop a response plan for local community? Is it possible to strengthen the relevant stakeholders on climate resilience so that we are able to sustain all of our resources that demonstrates our past and taking us into the future? Could we inventorize? Can we quantify the available cultural heritage practices? If we do this, we'll be in position to further demonstrate that we are looking at our past to tell our present and indeed the future. We need to strengthen the laws that we have. We need to demonstrate that these have legal basis. Just as we want to encourage and motivate every other person to take pride in harnessing all of our resources that we're talking about, we also need to strengthen from the legal angle, our support for this. Ladies and gentlemen, this slide shows some of the recommendations that all of us can support in. We want to engage relevant stakeholders to incorporate the growth of the sector into the various climate policies. We want to develop cultural heritage climate adaptation policy. We want to become more and more aware about climate change and heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to promote and share best practices amongst ourselves. History shows that this had been done before. Can we continue to do this? Can we continue to raise the awareness regarding the benefit we derive? We have talked about this earlier. What about strengthening public support for preservation? This is possible, and we recommend this. Ladies and gentlemen, good enough. We have support as with this webinar. It simply has demonstrated that we have international support. So in terms of resources, can we also support further? Can we strengthen the stock taking of the Nigeria heritage for effective reporting? All of this in their own right can serve as a platform of support. Ladies and gentlemen, my concluding slide says the past is essentially the key to the present and platform into the future. This signifies the importance of our cultural heritage. Indeed, it serves as an instrument to effectively communicate climate change awareness to the grassroots community who are impacted heavily by climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, we must learn the future of our past by engaging cultural heritage in our climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Itua. That's some really, really important points you make and really significant challenges that you raise also. Thank you for your presentation, and I'm sure it will stir some discussion. If we could make that polite, please, that would be really appreciated. I see a hand raised. If you would make your question, Mr. Ekwurzel. I need to unmute you, don't I?
Okay, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation I've been following all through. I think I have two concerned questions to Dr. Itua. Now, I need him to give a little more explanation on the value and ethics of the Nigerian person about cultural heritage. Secondly, how do we monitor or evaluate the performance of national regulations, policies, and the implementation of mainstreaming within subnational, where you have the various cultural heritages? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to, the last, your second one that talks about the subnational, do you want to repeat that?
What did you say, please?
The second one your second question that talks about the subnational. I heard subnational. Would you want to repeat your question on that?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Basically asking the performance. We have so many policies, so many regulations, because this relating it to the institution. So what is the current performance level? How do we monitor to see that the subnational are mainstreaming national policies?
Thank you very much. Jay, would you want us to take a couple of questions so that we just do this once and for all because of time?
Yes, if that suits you. Mm-hmm. You mean to answer them as a group, or Dr. Itua, is that what you mean, to answer them as a group?
Yes, yes. If we can take more questions and then we can.
Yes, please, Mr. Anka, Umasala Anka. If you could go ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Eugene, for your presentation. My concern about the cultural heritage, especially in Nigeria.
Mute yourself, please.
Yeah, I did. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. We're not hearing you before.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Eugene. My concern or just observation on the issue of cultural heritage in Nigeria is one, two things need to be put in place. First of all, from the picture I saw there was that of Sukur Kingdom, I guess. I visited that site in about 20 years ago. And now the issue of security is affecting our issue of visiting those sites. I remember that time in NYSC student, NYSC COP members used to visit the site, which is about 6 kilometers from the ground. And two, the issue of inconsistency in governance. Like 2 weeks ago, we visited a Minister of Environment, and we discussed issues which Nigerian Environmental Society engaged him in. And now, just a few days ago, he has been changed from environment to agriculture. So what would you advise? What's your take on this? Because the inconsistency in even the tenure, we thought a minister could last for 4 years, and now within the space of a tenure, and it has been changed to another ministry. So what can you say about this? You are a policy person, and please give us an insight on what's the possible way out to this inconsistency.
Thank you. Aliu, I saw Aliu's hand, and there was another person that raised up hand too. And then yes, Aliu.
Mr. Moderator, can I speak now?
Unfortunately, we're not hearing you.
Sorry, am I audible now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's coming out and going off.
Oh, really? Let me change my direction. Is it clear?
Yeah, okay, just try and ask or make your comment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eugene, for this very wonderful presentation. I think at this point, mine may be a question, say that needs to imagine understanding Hello, Eugene, you are shaking. You
We
cannot.
are not hearing you. Or would you want to put it on the chat?
Okay. So,
Yeah, yes, please put it on the chat. Do
sorry.
you have to? Thank you. And I'll move now to a question from Oluwatoyin Sag. I saw another hand up. Oh, yes.
Okay, maybe I can just, Jane, do I go ahead and
Okay,
give
yeah.
response to that?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much for all the presentations. They were really timely, and they're quite important in a time like this for Nigeria as well. Dr. Itua, I'm very pleased that you're talking about policies, and I believe policies are not just for one side. Policies are made by government for different bodies and different arms. I just want to know, at what point of this policy is inclusive participation of the people on ground? As in terms of when you're talking cultural heritage, you're talking about the heritage about a particular people and the ways in which they've lived and tried to keep this heritage alive. And sadly, yes, the climate is now impacting on it, but they are also important stakeholders in the issue of climate effect on their heritage. It's first their heritage before it becomes a public or a world heritage. So please, I'll appreciate if you could kind of shed more light on where the people of Sukur, where they actually stand in this policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, for the first question had been the ethical, relating it to the ethics of the Nigerians. I will say before now, we have been a people that respect culture, tradition, cultural heritage. But unfortunately, there have been some level of bastardization. People have taken all of this for granted. I'll just give you an example quickly. You recall during the ENSA riot in Lagos, people went to the Oba's palace and desecrated, as you will call it, the palace. They took away a number of those royal resources, let me put it that way, which was unheard of yesterday, but it's done today. And so, for an average Nigerian who is actually looking for how to feed himself, how much of cultural heritage do you want to talk to him about? How much respect do you want him to give? Of course, at the community level, just to quickly say that the average Nigerian still respects his own tradition, his own culture, his own heritage. But for those of us in town, in cities, we seem to have taken this too far without due regard. And I think that is what I will say. That is what and therefore, in terms of bringing the subnationals in, you have always worked with the national government, the subnationals. You have, for instance, the State Executive Council working with the president. What do they discuss? Is it only about sharing money? Do they talk about climate change? Do they talk about how they can better the lot of their people? That is their lot. That is their responsibility. But just to say, like you know, as far as climate change is concerned, I'm aware that virtually every state has climate desk. If we have climate desk, can we actually work? Can ICOMOS Nigeria, for instance, work with the various states in order to help them understand. Because before now, nobody, if not for ICOMOS, nobody is talking about culture, climate change and culture. So kudos to ICOMOS. We are starting. Can we scale up? Can we work with the subnationals? Yes. Before now, too, I will take it again, go back to the last person that asked that question, Oluwatoye. Policies, when they are made, if it has to do with the Sukur people, for instance, culture, relevant stakeholders should be brought in as early as possible. Their voices must be heard in such policy. You are making policies for them, so they should be part of it. It should be involved by everyone before it is signed off. That is what I will say concerning that. And so again, going back to the activities of ICOMOS, I think ICOMOS can further support in ensuring that all of this are indeed strengthened. I just want to tell you, before now, like I've said, I don't think any person directly had talked about culture and climate change. But not too long ago, ICOMOS did a number of webinars looking at the cultural heritage in Nigeria. For instance, there was Building Back Better, responding to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on Nigeria's heritage. Decolonizing Nigeria's heritage, policies, restitutions, and other strategies. And then Nigeria's heritage, the past, present, and the future. All of these are taken from that angle, climate change. And so a foundation has been laid. We can all work together. And just to let you know, in terms of policy consistency, we do not have control over that. If the rulers feel that some ministers will perform better elsewhere, that is within their own jurisdiction, as long as we live. But what remains, what should remain, is the policy, is the law, is what the other person had done that will be built upon. It is not the moving of the person. Every person, for instance, you had talked about policy consistency. That was what you spoke to, or you had developed a blueprint on why we should remain consistent. And then he's moved to another location. Has he disrupted what should be? Not at all. And indeed, just to let you know, our organization, Natural Eco Capital, supported the Federal Ministry of Environment to develop a long-term vision for low emission strategy. And now moving to the other angle of the strategy itself now. This is where your own voice should count when that is being developed. Sukur community, their own voice should also count, because you will be looking at virtually all the sectors. The nation will be looking at virtually all the sectors on how we can develop that strategy that will take us to low carbon by 2050. Recall, we were talking about decarbonization earlier. We're looking at decarbonization at the end of the century. But what can take us to at least 50% reduction, if not 75%? That is the strategy that will be developed. So I think I want to leave it like that, and just to let you know that for security issue is within the jurisdiction of the government. So if you have ideas you want to give to them on how they can fight the Boko Haram and the like, please go ahead. ICOMOS, I don't think, maybe from climate angle, yes, we can look at it from that angle, but not talking on security issues. But how the means of livelihood can be sustained of those people who live in such security challenged areas could be within our jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Itua, for your passion and the clarity of your vision. I think we must move on now. I see there is another hand raised, but we will wait till after the presentation of Professor Ambrose Zemba, who it gives me pleasure to introduce now. Thank you.
Okay. So what do you? Yeah. All right. Thank you, and good morning all, good afternoon. My own is to present a background information on the local area here, which is Sukur. And the other two presenters have already spoken about climate change at global level. Dr. Eugene has given us policy issues on Nigeria, and I want to give us a perspective of the local scenario here at the Sukur area. And I'm riding on the advantage that I'm close to the area. I visit the area more often with my students because I lecture close to the area, less than 200 kilometers. So I think I can go on my slides. My presentation actually is as follows. Okay. Okay. Just a minute, we're trying to get it ready. Yeah, okay. Okay, that is the one. That is the one, okay. Still working on the technical area to get the screen shared. All right. Yes, we are good to go. And that is the title of my presentation. I titled it Vulnerability of Heritage Sites to Climate Change, Case of Sukur World Heritage, Adama State. And the next slide. Next, just one slide more, okay? All right, okay. Just let's go to the next. Yes, I like I said earlier, I tried to give us a background information on Sukur heritage for those of us that may not be aware with the area, and looking at the physiographic characteristics, talking about the relief, the vegetation, and so on one hand, and also look at the socioeconomic variables. The next is weather, climate, and climate change, which some of my previous presenters have spoken about. I may not dwell much on it. Next is evidences of climate change in the area, looking at the Northeast as a whole, as a region, Adama State as a sub-region, and the Sukur on the local scale, and try to present the potentials of climate change on Sukur heritage and possibly the actions to be taken. Now, this is what I have as a preambles. Already taken it, of course. The essence of the seminar is to prepare us for the main workshop that is coming up, and that is that create awareness of the public regarding the intersection between Sukur landscape and climate change. Let's go to the next slide. Now, like I said, I will basically give us background of what obtains in the local area here. First, the physiographic characteristics. Location, we're quite aware of location of Sukur area, but basically, look at the climate of the area. We have these variables that the average values. Of course, it's a tropical climate area with dry and wet seasons, and an average rainfall of about 854 millimeters. Temperature maximum is around 33.2, and so on. The altitude is, as we all may know, is above a little 1,000 meters above sea level. Yes. Now, vegetation, yes, you can see on the slide there, this is what obtains in the area. is basically a Sudan savanna vegetation type with short grasses interspersed with shrubs and trees. In terms of geology, the rocks are of Precambrian and Cambrian ages, and the common rock types are graphite, gneisses, magnetite, and so on. The land area is what we have presented here. It comprises of the core area of the Sukur and the buffer zone, and giving us that value. Yes, the next slide. The relief, yes, we all know it is located on the Mandra Mountain between Nigeria and Cameroon. Of course, it is a plateau. And plateau means you ascend before you get to the flat land area. And the slides we have here are typical landscape of the area in terms of their farmland structures and some paveways. Next slide. Now, the cultural aspects, we have the farming system, as you can see there, the traces, on the mountain top, and the shelter, and the security is, you can see how it is fenced so as to get the people secured. Then the water sources is what we have there, and the people patronize. Now, on the climate change, and of course we know climate to be average weather condition, like my co-presenters have already explained. But most importantly, the IPCC report points to the fact that global temperature has risen by approximately 0.8 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial value, like also mentioned by Brenda. And the major concern here is that in a world where climate is changing, Sukur heritage will likely be faced with a range of new pressures that are quite different to those experienced in the past. Hence, there is need for management practices to be put in place, to reduce the impact of this threat. Now, next. Yes, we have some evidences on ground regarding the climate change in the area. Like I said, we look at it at the regional scale. First, what we have here is variables that are obtainable here. Increasing temperature is common. Changes in rainfall regime, frequency and intensity, of course, yes. We have Harmattan dust, which is also very common. And we know the area is just very close to the Sahara desert, which is a part of the northeast. Then the desert encroachment issue also is paramount here, and getting to movement by the day. And then we have extreme weather events in the area. The other part of the slide gives us a scenario of what happens in terms of the local area. This is lecture within the region, and it has been shrinking over the years from over 25,000 kilometers square to less than 1,500. And that is what the scenario is in terms of changes in climate and in the area. Next. Now, coming down to Adama, yes, we have some evidences of changes also in terms of climate. And this is as a result of some research by some climatologists in the area. We have issues of temperature on the increase, rainfall decreasing, delay in onset date of rain, early cessation days, and so on and so forth. We have a graph there that shows anomalies of mean annual temperature in the area. From the date, for available data we have, we were able to compute this in one of the researches we conducted. And this is the trend, meaning the temperature is actually on the increase, fluctuating between 1 to -1. And that tells us that the situation is actually, not normal. We have changes and so on. Yes. Now, we also, as evidence of climate change in the area, we have some stories that we live with every day, especially with regards to news and all of that. For instance, in 2012, we had a flood in the whole of Adama, where Premium Times reported that about 17 people died, 50,000 were homeless, and all that. So a number of cases like that are abound in the areas. These are all indications that climate is changing to some extent. And below here we have a graph, a diagram of what occurred in 2012, the whole area flooded. Now, I also made use of some data, particularly the satellite image of the area, and also data from MERA, that is Modern Era Retrospective and Analysis and Research Application. So I was able to get the data just to process and give us an idea of what is happening with the climate. First, the descriptive statistics from climatic variables. The climatic variables, I obtained them for a number of 39 years, from 1981 to 2019. And if you look at the variance, the last column, the middle table there, you see that particularly rainfall has a variance of about 37, which means there is a high degree of variation in the rainfall values in the area. And the same thing with relative humidity, temperature, and so on. Was also able to get the temperature trend, the trend for each of the climatic data. And from what we have there, they point to kind of increasing trend. Maximum temperature for the number of years I mentioned, 1981 to 2019. You can see the trend line there shows an indication of increase. The same, the other side we have minimum temperature also, and an increasing trend. The same thing with other. Let's go. Same thing with other variables here. We have annual rainfall, total rainfall. It's also on a decreasing trend actually. The wind speed, and we have relative humidity. All of these climatic variables, like I said, I computed them from the data I had, and just to give us an idea of what is happening in the area, to inform us of the next actions to be taken. Yes. Apart from the climatic data, I also made use of the satellite images to come up with two variables. One is what we call the NDVI, that is Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. This one gives us an idea of the density of vegetation in an area, and also the health of vegetation also in an area. We look at the diagram here, NDVI of 1985 and 2002. Actually, they were Landsat images of the area. And if you look at the value there, the highest value in 1985 was about 0.63. Now, the NDVI value ranges from -1 to 1. Where you have a value of -1 means it's bare of vegetation, like water body. You have a value tending towards 1, it means high vegetation density in an area. So if you compare the two images, you notice that in 1985, the highest NDVI value was 0.63, while if you look at the 2020 value, the highest vegetation index was 0.25. So that is also an indication that there are changes actually within the area, which can also be a factor that could affect climate. And next. Next thing is I try to look at the land surface temperature also from the climatic data, the satellite image, using the band 6 of TM, that is thematic mapper, and band 10 of Landsat 8. If you look at the variables here from the legend, in 1985, the highest temperature in the area was 33 degrees Celsius. But if you look at the 2020 values, has changed to about 37. That is the maximum values in this regard, meaning there is an evidence of change in the temperature of an area. Yes. Now, the potential impacts of climate change on Sukur cultural heritage. Looking at the variables we have considered above, it means the likelihood is that this could, be a factor affecting the heritage sites. And this decided to present the data in a table, and we have the climatic parameters, the climate change risk, the physical, social, and cultural impacts. Now, the first is the atmospheric moisture change, including flooding, intense rainfall, changes in water table levels, change in soil, and the various impacts also, like we have data loss preserved in waterlogged, anaerobic, and anaerobic conditions. We have the physical changes to porous building materials and finishes due to rising temperature. These are some of the potential impact of the climate change, like we have seen in the previous slides. And this is what we could expect with respect to moisture change. Next. Okay, next. Then the temperature, we have noticed that temperature is on the increase, and these are likely impacts that could result damage inside bricks, stone, ceramics that has got wet and frozen within material before drying. We have changes in fitness for purpose of some of structures. For example, overheating of the interior of buildings can lead to inappropriate alterations to the historic fabric due to the introduction of engineering solutions. So these are likely impacts that we could see in the near future if action is not taken to, mitigate it. Next. Same thing with wind, climate change risk in terms of wind, as a result of wind-driven rain, wind-transported salt, wind-driven sun, winds, gusts, and changes in direction could result to impact as listed there, like structural damage and collapse. One of the things that may likely be the end result. Then on the desertification, of course, desertification, like I mentioned earlier, is a common phenomenon here because we have Sahara Desert just about 200 kilometers away from Sukur area. And so desertification comes with a lot of risk, drought, heat waves, fall in water level, and so on. And the likely impacts are the erosion that are likely to happen, abandonment and collapse, loss of cultural memory and all of that. So those are some of the things. Then climate and pollution acting together. These are another factor, and the likely and the risk is what we listed there, and the impacts associated to it. Then we have climate and biological effects as climatic parameters as a result of change, and the risk associated with that are listed also there, and the impacts that we are likely to experience. Next. Now, the action to be taken, considering all these things that we've discussed above, there's need to take action, which I believe that is one of the mandates of ICOMOS, doing something to solve the problem. Now, research is very, very critical in this regard, in terms of basic research and applied research. So that will go a long way to address the problem of the climate change, as we have seen evidences before now. And the need for scientific determination of climate parameters, there is need to also develop models. There is need to develop and test damage functions. There is need to come up with adaptation strategies and good policies, as also explained by Dr. Eugene. Yes. Then the funding, of course, is part and parcel of it. Then, and apart from that, the training, which this occasion is one of it, and I think ICOMOS is doing a good job to, get the thing right. Thank you. Let's go. And in summary, having seen what is obtainable in the Sukur area, in terms of its location, in terms of variables, in terms of indices of climatic parameters, and they are pointed to the fact that they are at the increase, then there's need to consider these factors listed below here, understanding the vulnerability of materials, in terms of research, like I've mentioned, understanding how traditional materials and practices need to adopt, then modeling and monitoring change. And then there's need also to prevent damage by developing long-term strategies and also develop tools to manage cultural heritage in a changing climate. And that is the recommendation that this presentation has presented before us. Next, and thank you. I think that is all I have. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to present the paper like this.
Professor Zemba, I can't thank you enough for that excellent presentation. And one of the comments coming through, I think, is testimony to your expertise and the way you present, and where it said this data about evidence of climate change from Sukur is insightful and interesting. And that was a comment from Olufemi Adetunji. And thank you for that comment. I just think that's so interesting, and to bring together, you know, we're going down in scales of level of detail and how you present on the very specifics of the site and the cultural heritage elements. We have actually only, say, 1 minute per question. So if you can make your point in a very short space of time, Dr. Gabriel, or else we can communicate afterwards, because we need to move on to the closing of the event. So can I ask you to make your comment if it's a short one? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. All protocols duly observed. I really appreciate the time. Now, I would just like to say a few as regards culture affecting climate change impact on culture. I think the Council for Monuments and Museum stuff in Nigeria needs to critically look into our cultural heritage, and they need to embrace EIAs. A lot of our touristic values, our cultural touristic values, Olumorok, Oshun Festival, we are close to the grassroots. We know the impact. The temperature of these waters are changing. The temperature of this water, people come to Oshun Festival every year. These impacts are becoming significant, and this is due to climate change. Secondly, Olumorok is there. There are so many anthropogenic impacts that are affecting some part of the historical development. Okay, like 2 months ago, we were working on the research, and something came to my mind. When the Black people were under the rock, there was a part of that rock that drips medicinal water, ancient times, but it is no more dripping that water, no matter the amount of rainfall. And that has a significant, cultural significance to that rock. Why people come there to pay, they pay money, they pay a lot of fee to get into that place, to come and see. It's an attraction. It's a cultural attraction. So I'm saying this because there's a lot of impacts, and they are becoming very, very significant. And this will reduce our cultural touristic value as a nation. So let's embrace EIA. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. I think that's really important to have those perspectives from, a very personal or something you're observing yourself. And yes, I think there was a question came up in the chat, and I was about to say the same, that this kind of question will be addressed during the CVI workshop that we will be having as part of our project. And I think I can speak for us all when I say that we've really benefited from all these insights, and it's I suppose it's provoked as much thought as it's answered questions, but hopefully has raised awareness of climate change and cultural heritage. I'd like to move now to Mr. Aliyu Las Abdu, President of ICMOS Nigeria. I'd like to bring you in now to make your closing remarks and bring the event to a close. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Unfortunately, I think last time I tried to speak, I was having audio problem. I don't know whether I'm audible now.
Yeah.
Very clearly, thank you.
I thank you very much. I cannot thank you enough. Only that I would use this opportunity to most sincerely express ICOMOS Nigeria's very deep appreciation to this team of climate experts. And particularly, I think we were thrilled, we were very excited by the way the presentation, start from the global perspective down to the local level. So all these presentations are very, very important for sharing ideas and also raising awareness about the impact of climate change in the region. This is very important webinar on the climate change and heritage. And as all the speakers have explained, ICOMOS Nigeria has really brought this subject to the fore because we know it is very important and it is really impacting on our heritage sites all over the country. The key issue is that for now, the climate impact on cultural landscapes like Sukur, where the people interact with the environment, natural environment, with whom the impact of the climate change, is necessarily having impact on the way they interact and adapt to their environment is a very important theme that requires their own participation, their own understanding, and how their own perception and how they react to it. So I think this theme for climate change and our cultural heritage, especially given these two in Africa, given these two different scenarios, one of the coastal region and the other one in inland region in Sukur, is very, very important and gives us the wide different ways that climate change affects different types of cultural heritage. So without going to trying to go into another lecture, I think all the team that give this fantastic presentation, we appreciate them very well. And it is really a very important, ground something, whetting the appetite of all of us that will participate in the upcoming workshop. I also want to thank all the attendees here for their interest, and we hope that this is a clear indication about the relevance and impact of climate change and the interest and participation of the community and all stakeholders in this very important matter. So once again, I wish to thank each and every one of you, and ICOMOS Nigeria is really delighted in the interest and the participation and contribution of everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President. And I'll bring the event to a close now, and I'll stop the recording. And the recording will be available through the CVI website. Thank you so much for attending. Goodbye.